Hi. I was asked a question. How do you make Germany competitive? How do you make a competitive German list? And that's a tough one. I don't play Germans myself. I've played against quite a number of Germans, mostly successfully. And I'm not really sure that Germany is the most competitive nation. There's a lot of problems. There's also a lot of opportunities and things that you can do. So what I did in order to answer this query was I talked to some very knowledgeable people. I talked to Manuel and I talked to the best German player I personally know and have played against many times and lost to many times, Anders Gaffel, and talked to them about what they thought about how to make Germans in a competitive way. And so my reflections on this is based on what they have told me, what I myself have experienced. And let's get a few things out of the way. If you want to run competitive Germans, I would suggest, if you have the possibility, to look at theatre lists. If your tournament allows theatre lists, they are the place to go and look for something that's really competitive. However, most tournaments don't. But if you do have the opportunity, go and look at Western Desert. Western Desert is always where the good stuff is, right? Western Desert, the Deutsche Afrika Korps, DAC. There's some really nice things you can do there with two tanks, for instance. And German tanks are okay. They're expensive, but they are quite good. And you can buy some tanks that are worth the points as well. So there's the thing you can do there, where you sort of make a pseudo tank list. If tank lists are not allowed, but theatre lists are, that's where you can sort of cheat the system. Another thing that I would suggest you look at is the Luftwaffe Defense Force from the new Normandy book. That is a highly defensive list, where you can really make use of machine guns and Turmstellungs. There's also one, I can't remember what it's called, but there's one where you get free recce on all your half tracks. That's the only way I can see you running a lot of Hanomaks successfully, because with recce on everything, you might just throw in a couple of pioneers in those half tracks, and if something threatening comes up, you recce away. If it doesn't, unload the pioneers, flame everything, right? So theatre lists. But if you are restricted to reinforced lists, there are certain things that you can do. And a lot of problems. I'm not going to go into the problems here. This is what I suggest you try to do, or you look at and see if you can make work, okay? You try to utilize the few advantages that Germany have. They have access to basically all the toys of the game, everything. So they're very, very flexible. You can get everything you need and want. You pay for it all, but you can get everything, right? So when you're designing a list, if you are a player who likes to have a bit of everything, what I call all the tools in the box kit players, then Germany is a good place to start, because they do have access to everything. Soviets also do, and they are a bit more competitive, so right. But Germany is a place to look. They also have the extra snap too. So if you can really make your lieutenant important enough and of high enough quality, like first lieutenant or maybe even a captain or something, if you can do that, you have a figure that will allow you to basically get a Warhammer first turn. if you get the dice. I am not that good at this trick. I know that there are people who can do it. The snap to trick, where you have several units that move at once, that sort of coordinate an attack, set it up. When you do get it to work, it is brilliant. It looks so good, and it's devastating. Most of the time it's highly situational, but you can train this, and you can try to make it work. I don't think that you should go with the Hitler's buzzsaw rule as a thing that you think is a competitive edge for the Germans. LMGs and MMGs on infantry are too expensive, even though you get the extra shot. They're just not worth it. And that goes for basically all the upgrades, all the tools that you can put on German units. Most of the time they are not worth it. So don't upgrade them with all the weapons. Don't buy assault rifles. Don't buy extra LMGs. All of that, it's not worth it. But you can get away with running LMG teams, and you can get away with running LMGs in Schützen squads, because they're a bit more inexpensive for what they do. Now, when we're looking at good competitive units, there is a points for value calculation that you have to make every time, and that's why I push out the MGs. They're simply still not worth it, even though you get the extra shot. What you can find in the German list that is worth the points is they have very, very, very cheap troops. The cheapest dice you possibly can get in any army. Osttruppen, and you can make those, even you can make them shirkers. That is really, really good. And they have quite a few troops where you have green on inexperienced troops, making them cheap. So, but Osttruppen shirkers is extremely cheap for an infantry unit. Yes, they are not going to do anything, but they are a dice. And that dice is needed if you run tanks for Germans, which I think you should. You're going to need that dice. So, and the shirkers can just sit on an objective, in cover, go down, all game. That works out fine. So shirkers is a good idea. If we're looking at infantry, I would also look at assault pioneers. They are veteran, making them expensive, but you can buy a few of those and you have a workable flaming fleet, it's called, like a barbecue list where you have a lot of flamers. They would be better if they were regular, and you can get, if you are allowed to take units from the Fortress Budapest, you can take SS Panzerpioniers, and they come regular. So regulars with flamethrowers. That's the same as the Americans and the Soviets get. And that is a good way to put a lot of flamethrowers in your list. So you can really buff out flamethrowers in German lists if you're allowed to do that. Otherwise, you're going to have to buy them as veterans, making them more survivable, yes, but also more expensive, right? Now, one more unit that I wanted to add in, Brandenburgers. They are fun, but you need to take them as cheap as possible, because it's really their special rules that is good. They mess up the enemy's deployment options. So, and that is always good, at least in tournament play, where you then have to, you can basically count on the opponent doing one thing, and then you can tailor the rest of your list to counter that one thing. Use the Brandenburgers. That works. So that was the Panzer Pioneers, Assault Pioneers, and Brandenburgers and Schurkers. Right, that was the infantry. The rest of the infantry for the Germans are just bog standard infantry. They don't add anything extra. They don't have special rules making them extra good. What they do have is access to every single weapon of the game, and it's all expensive and it all costs points. So not really worth it. They don't get special rules that helps them. There's no like flavor where you can make them special and do one thing especially well. Although I would suggest maybe at one point in your life trying out SS Cavalry, veteran tough fighters on horses. It just for fun. I know it's not extremely competitive, but it's really fun. Charging fanatic veteran tough fighters into close combat from 9 inches away, 18 inches away. Man, yeah, that's good fun. Anyways, back to the good units. The place where the Germans have an advantage is not in transports. That's where many people make a mistake. They do have a lot of different transports, but most of them are too expensive. Where they do have an advantage is in their tank slot, which is maybe not the best because you only have one tank, right? Unless you can run dual platoons, or if you take one of the theaters, as I mentioned before. So, in the Panzer slot, I would look at the Renault Wurfrahmen, which has a rocket multi-launcher. The Panzerwerfer, which also has a multi-launcher. The Polizei tank, which is basically a Darker Steward just for the Germans. It has 4 MMGs. Believe it or not, that's quite a lot of MMGs. The Kugelblitz, which is a Panzer III with a closed top turret where there is 2 autocannons in it. That is a terror to behold on the board if you're running trucks. It will slice through anything. It'll just kill it. In my eyes, the Kugelblitz is a better Wirbelwind because it's closed top. The Panzer I is actually also a good little tank. It has 2 MMGs, Hitler's boss saw, and it's fully enclosed. So, and just as you know, as an annoying little tank, that works really well. Finally, I would look at the Panzer IIIs and IVs. They were better before they nerfed Tigerfear, yes, but those are good if very expensive tanks. Mainly good because of their main cannon, which is typically better than what the Allies have on similar tanks. But it's also more expensive. I mentioned that, right? One neat trick that you can pull with the Germans is you can have a multi-launcher tank in your tank slot, and then at the same time in your artillery slot you can buy a Nebelwerfer. The Nebelwerfer is also a multi-rocket launcher. So you have 2 multi-rocket launchers in your list. And that is, if you're able to roll 6s, that is very competitive. If you're on a city board, you're going to wreck the enemy's day. And the enemy will spread out because you have those multi-launchers. They will spread out and you can sort of concentrate your tanks or whatever it is you have on one section of the enemy and then just kill that section and then move on. 2 things I want to add at the end. One thing I've learned from Anders is that a pretty standard AA autocannon on a one of those swivel mounts where it can sort of go round and then it has a gun shield. He often places that in a house or in a ruin where it has hard cover and then just sits there and shoots at basically everything he sees. He goes on to ambush all the time. It has so much range that it becomes really difficult for me to move anywhere. So he closes down lines of movement. That works well. Um, so I would recommend you looking at that. If you're not going with the Nebelwerfer in your artillery slot, maybe look at this autocannon. Final thing, Panzerfausts. Panzerfausts are a point trap. They are expensive for a single shot weapon, but you can have them on all your units, making those units a real threat to enemy tanks. I suggest that you limit yourself to buying one, maybe two Panzerfausts per unit. If you're running inexperienced, I would not go beyond one Panzerfaust per unit. If you're running regulars, you could get away with two, especially if those regulars or veterans are mounted in a truck or whatever and can move up and sort of hunt a bit, then it's okay. But for your inexperienced troops, don't do it. Use the Panzerfaust as a threat. Don't use it to hunt stuff. Use it to threaten stuff away from you. So that the enemy Daka Steward doesn't move up and obliterate your Osttruppen, right? Have that Panzerfaust sitting there somewhere and just be a threat, because that will make the enemy hesitate in moving up and attacking you. But don't expect it to kill anything, because most of the time you'll be shooting, you'll have moved. The enemy may have some cover, maybe you're at long range, and suddenly you're shooting on sixes, right? And if you're inexperienced, don't even bother firing. So yeah, that is what I would do if I was to make a competitive German list. That's what I would look at. I think I would go for either a Flamer list or a multi-launcher list, or maybe a combination of those two. Depending on where you want to put your points. Cheers. Bye.